All right, everybody, welcome to the webinar series. We're going to start off with going into the personal statement, getting right into the nitty-gritty. Now, with the personal statement, this is surprisingly can be really difficult for a lot of students. They don't know how to really navigate and really organize their personal statement. Now, there are going to be a lot of programs that are going to give you some prompts, going to give you some questions in terms of answering those questions on your personal statement, and then you're just going to turn it in. But there may be some programs that don't give you prompts at all. And even for the ones that do give you prompts, I do think it's really important to interweave what I'm going to talk about, even alongside, in addition to you answering those prompts. Those prompts are probably going to ask you different questions like, why are you applying to this program? What are some of your clinical experiences and your research background? But I'm going to really add in some things that I think you should also add into those prompts and the way that you answer those questions. Now, let's say there is a program that doesn't really give you a prompt and you just have to write a personal statement. Okay, what should you write about? Where should you start? What should you do? The first thing is that the committee is really trying to figure out who you are as a person, right? They want to know who you are, and they want to know who you are on paper. If they like you on paper, then they're going to want to meet you in person or meet you virtually for your interviews. So it's really important to show the human, the emotional parts of who you are as a person on paper. I'm not saying that you need to make them cry. I'm not saying that you need to fabricate anything. What I'm saying is that you need to show yourself in this personal statement. And you can start with just asking the simple question of who is this person. So as we look at the prompt, or as we look at some of the things that I've mentioned here in terms of writing a personal statement, let's talk about it. Who are you? Did you grow up in the U.S.? Did you grow up in outside of the U.S.? Were you raised in a single parent home? Do you have a big family? Do you have a small family? Did you grow up with any mental health disorders or any challenges? You don't have to go too personal. You don't have to go too deep, but you want to go deep enough and you want to go personal enough that they can remember you. You have to remember they're going to be reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of personal statements. And so if you can really be unique in terms of how you write your personal statement, they are going to remember you when they see you. They're going to be like, oh yeah, this person said this in their personal statement. Ooh, I want to know more. I want to pry, right? And so you want to be as unique as you can. And so whatever experiences you've gone through, whatever challenges you've gone through, whatever things in your life that have really opened the door to where you are today in terms of applying for graduate school, talk about those things, talk about your experiences, talk about your family life, talk about your personal life, and show them who you are. The next thing that I would really talk about is why are you interested, right? Like, why even apply to clinical psychology programs? You can apply to master's level programs, you can go into business, you can do a lot of different things to make way more money than clinical psychology in way less time. Why go to this program? Why now, right? Why are you interested now? You want to answer that question because most likely you're going to have to answer that question if you do get invited to an interview, and it's a really important question, and honestly that question is more so for you because you need to answer that question for yourself. Why do you want to become a clinical psychologist? Is it because your family is telling you to do so? Is it because it looks cool and you see a lot of clinical psychologists on social media doing and saying certain things? Is it because you want to make a lot of money? Is it because you want a private practice? Like what is the real reason that's driving the behavior of applying to graduate school? Because graduate school is long, and in many cases, you may actually come out with more debt and be a little bit more financially in the hole longer than you think. I mean, there's a lot of clinicians that are still paying off debt decades later. And so this isn't something to just lightly go into. And I think the committee is also going to want to know and figure out why you specifically have chosen that career. And so talk about that. Talk about what piqued your interest, how long you've had that interest for, how did the passion build up, what made you want to apply, and any other technical interest in psychology that you might have. This is where you might talk about your clinical experiences, your research experience, your mentoring, the supervision that you've gotten from other psychologists, your exposure to psychology in some way. Talk about that linear path or that non-linear path towards psychology so that they can know your story. The other thing that I think is really important to talk about next is how do you know this is a good fit? And this is where they specifically want to know, how is this a good fit for our program, right? Like, you may be a good applicant, you may be great on paper, but how are you a good fit for our program? Not every student is going to be a good fit for every program. There's a lot of different programs out there. And yes, many of them are APA approved and APA accredited, but they have differences. They have cultural differences. They focus on different things. They might focus more on theoretical orientation and how you do therapy. Some may focus more on research. Some may focus more on clinical practice. Some may focus more on serving underserved populations. It really just depends. And so what have you done in terms of your own research, in terms of going through the school website, going through the brochure, investigating and pretty much looking out for some of the faculty members and things, and looking at things that they've done to figure out, okay, I know that this school is probably a really good fit for me. If you can communicate that in your personal statement and back that up in your interview, that's going to be really promising to the committee in terms of accepting you. So paint that picture, talk about your professional clinical experience, have some self-reflection, paint the story of how you know that this would be a good fit. Mention any other professors or any people that wrote your letter of recommendation about why they also might think that it's a good fit for you and how that all fits in, right? This is also a great time to talk about gaps in your GPA. Perhaps you've had difficulties that you've had to overcome. Perhaps there's different things that you've had to go through in terms of not having a good score on the GRE. Talk about that, talk about those weaknesses. They want to also see some self-reflection and introspection in knowing that you are aware of your weaknesses and that's okay. That not everyone's perfect. Everyone's going to have some form of weaknesses. And so being able to communicate that and using your weaknesses as strengths, right? So for example, if your weakness is perhaps you don't have a high GPA, listen, you can talk about how that has pushed you and driven you to work really hard on your academics. And in what you've learned in undergrad, you want to implement the same hard work and attitude and good attitude and optimism into graduate school, just like you did in undergrad, right? So that's a good way of turning a weakness into a strength so that they at least understand that, first of all, you're aware of your weakness, you recognize it, you acknowledge it, you bring it to the forefront, and you're doing something about it. It doesn't mean that you have to fix it. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It just means that you're doing something about it. You're trying to improve yourself. You're trying to grow as a person, and you're trying to become better. All right? The next thing is, what do you want to do in this career? 5 to 10 years from now, after you go into your graduate program, what do you want to do with the degree? Do you want to work with a certain population? Do you want to specialize in a certain niche? Do you want to work with kids, adults, lifespan? Do you want to work in geropsychology, neuropsychology, health psychology? Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to teach? Do you want to do research? Do you want to do consulting? Do you want to do clinical practice? What age group or ethnicity or race or gender or sexuality do you want to focus on? What are some of the things that is driving you to get into graduate school, and where do you see yourself in the future? You need to communicate the vision that you have for yourself to the committee members. The reason why is that when you can communicate that vision, you're going to be able to communicate that vision while you're in graduate school, and also when you start to prepare for internship towards the end of graduate school. So the clearer that you can have about your vision right now, and the more that you can communicate that clearly into your personal statement, the easier it's going to be for you in terms of being able to kind of filter and renew and renovate that vision to where it's going to be very, very even more clear by the time you get to internship. All right, so that's something to definitely think about. And then finally, hopefully throughout this whole process, you have been connecting with the school on a personal level. All right, and this means, reading over the mission statement of the school. Does the mission statement of the school align with your personal goals? Seriously. You know, if they care about underserved populations, if they care about certain things, does that align with your goals? This is where you talk directly to them about their goals and how their goals matches with your goal, right? And in being able to showcase that, you're showing the school that their passions, their goals, their aspirations align directly with yours. They correlate with your own values, your own mission statement, and it is an obvious choice, a match made in heaven, that they should choose you and you should choose them, right? Sell those points in writing and make them want to meet you in person, all right? So that's the personal statement. Again, this is just a general prompt. If they give you specific prompts to write about in your own in their own personal statement, you can interweave some of the things that we've talked about into that prompt, and that's what's going to help you, I think, help that become even more clear when you go in and you write some of those things for the school. All right, so hopefully that can be helpful. We're going to dive into the next section of the application right now. All right, so now let's talk about the CV. And before we get into the CV, one thing that I always mention is that there's a difference between a resume and a CV. A lot of times people think that they're the same thing. They're different. A resume is going to give you highlights of what you've done in the past. A CV is going to be much more detailed and is going to tell a little bit more of a coherent story about who you are in terms of your professional, clinical, and volunteering experiences. So be sure that if the school is asking you for your resume, that you give a resume. And if they're asking you for a CV, that they give a CV. If they say either resume or CV, I would pick the CV because it's a little bit more detailed in terms of what you do. Just like we did in the personal statement in terms of telling a story about who you are, we're going to tell a story about who you are in the CV. Obviously, it's going to be in a little bit of a different format. It's not going to be in sort of a storytelling paragraph type of way. It's going to be more so bullet points, right? So this is going to be a situation where most of the committee members are going to briefly go through your CV. They're not going to read every word. They're just going to pretty much skim it. And so you want to make sure that you highlight the most important, pertinent things that you have done in your lifetime into the CV, okay? So once we go into the template, you're going to see you want to put your first name and last name, email address, or home address, actually, home address, email, and then your phone number. And then you're going to have your education. So you're going to have the whether you have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctoral degree, and you're going for another doctorate. That would be crazy, but hey, listen, you can do whatever you want. You want to put all of that in the education front. And here's the thing. In terms of the organization, you can organize this how you want. This is how I've organized my CV and how I've also seen other people organize their CV. But there is range and diversity in how you want to organize your CV. For me, it makes the most sense to put the name, your contact information at the top, because chances are they're going to use that information to contact you, right? So if they tell you that you've been accepted into their program, they're going to want to be able to see your phone number right away and call you up and tell you that you've been accepted, right? So I like to put that information at the top. When it comes to your education, I think that's really good to put the education towards the top because they can see whether or not you have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or some other form of degree like a doctorate. And they can see perhaps some of your educational qualifications in terms of their program. So I think that's good. And you know, if you come from a really good, prestigious school, hey, it doesn't hurt for you to show that in the next section of your CV. The next thing that I would do is the honors and awards. And part of the reason that is that, again, listen, if you don't have a lot of honors or awards or scholarships or anything like that, you can completely skip this section. It's not a huge section. It's not really important, right? But it might showcase a little bit of, you know, who you are and what you've done and what you've accomplished. Remember, this is a point in time that you can brag on yourself, right? Like there's no shame in bragging on yourself in this light. So go for it, right? If you got honors and awards that are applicable to some type of research or clinical experience, put it on here. Now, what we're talking about isn't, you know, winning, you know, second place in a track meet when you were in 10th grade or 3rd grade. We're talking about the things that matter the most in terms of clinical and professional experiences. For example, for me, I was able to get an award for a research poster presentation. I killed two birds with one stone. I talked about research and I talked about my award. Boom, perfect, right? So like, you know, I have a few scholarships in terms of my program. I put that on here as well. Put it on there, right? It's gonna make, it may not make a huge difference, but it's gonna be able to showcase a little bit of who you are in terms of what you've accomplished and what you care about. The next thing is gonna be clinical experience, and this is where it might get a little complicated because sometimes a lot of people ask the question of like, oh my gosh, should I put that I was a delivery driver? Should I put that I, you know, worked in Hollister? Should I put the job occupation that I had in high school? Listen, again, you want to filter the things that make the most sense, right? I would not put that you worked in retail. I would not put that you worked as a delivery driver. And here's the thing, those things are important, those things matter, but in terms of this setting, they don't matter as much. And so I would focus on things like maybe you were a case manager for a social worker or a clinical mental health community center, right? Maybe you were a suicide hotline specialist, right? Put clinical relevant experiences. And here's the thing, there's a lot of different things that can count as clinical experience. I'm not saying that you need to be a therapist. You don't have to, you know, be an ABA therapist or behavioral technician or have some type of certification. Anything that you do when it comes to dealing with people, when it comes to interacting with people and handling people and serving people, that counts as clinical experience. So for me, for example, I used to be in dental school. I was in dental school for about 1.5 years. I decided to move away from dental school. I became a medical exercise specialist, and I worked in a rehabilitative center. So I put that I worked in rehabilitation for geriatric populations who were going through different injuries, recovering from different injuries, and I helped them to exercise in a safe and healthy way while interacting and collaborating with physical therapists and occupational therapists. So for me, in that example, right, it's not directly mental health correlated, but it is physical health, and I was helping patients. I was in a clinical setting helping patients, right? So that's one example of that. Another example could be, you know, working in some type of case manager position. Another example could be working in human resources department or working with some type of nonprofit organization that is passionate about helping underserved or disenfranchised communities. Again, you know, if you've worked with your church in terms of paid positions, in terms of helping people who are poor or needy or whatever it is, that is something that you can put in your clinical experience section. All right, so be creative, right? But again, understand that it doesn't necessarily have to be therapy focused, right? Because you may not be a therapist yet, but you probably have done things that have served people in some ways, and you can put that in a clinical experience section. Next is going to be professional experience. And here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. If you want to put that you were a delivery driver, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just going to say it's not going to really matter, right? So here in the professional experience, you may have professional experiences working as a manager in a retail store, you know. That is something that you should put in this section, right? I'm not saying completely void all of the different things that you've done in your lifetime in terms of all the jobs that you've done. I'm just saying you might have to pick and choose what makes the most sense. You know, if I was a manager in a retail store, I would put that in there. Why? Because even though it doesn't necessarily pertain to clinical experiences, it does pertain to professional experience, right? As a manager, you probably got some experience managing other people, supervising other people, which is going to correlate with clinical psychology when you, as a clinical psychologist or even as a clinical psychology student, supervise other people, right? And manage other people to some capacity. So I think that's important to understand too, is that that can be a great thing to put on the CV and the resume. Next, we have research experience, and I've always mentioned this in all of my videos that for PsyD programs, they may not focus on research as much as PhD programs, but listen, if it was me, I'd play it safe, all right? If you have an opportunity to get research experience, get it, right? You don't want to be denied an acceptance because you didn't have enough research compared to the other applicants. And honestly, if you're applying to PsyD programs and you have a lot of research experience, you're going to be miles ahead of everybody else. You're going to be really competitive, and you're probably going to you're probably going to kill it in that program. So that's going to make you really competitive anyways. And why wouldn't you want to do something that's going to make you competitive? All right. So research experience, research experience, research experience. Ask your professors, ask your faculty members, ask programs, ask students online if you can help them with their dissertation or their research project or their capstone. You'd be surprised how many students really need help with any and every little thing in terms of their dissertation, and they'll take all the help they can get. And honestly, you can put that in your CV in terms of gaining and giving and contributing research experience or contributing research help to anybody. It doesn't matter if they're a faculty member or if they're another student or they're someone from your job, it counts as research experience. Next thing, now there's a lot of people that may not have a research presentations yet. That's okay. If you do, great, you can put it on here. There might be some people who don't have poster presentations or publications. Again, that is perfectly okay. You can put it on here if you can, and if not, that's okay. If you have certifications, of course, or licensures, put it on here as well. That's really good to know. And then the last thing I would end is leadership and volunteering experience. Again, in terms of this, you don't necessarily have to add on the list every single volunteer experience that you had. All right. You don't have to go back to second grade where you helped out with your church function in terms of helping the homeless, which was, hey, listen, it's great that you did that, but you don't have to add everything, right? If your CV ends up being 3 pages long and you add in 4 pages of leadership and volunteering experience, it's a little bit overwhelming. All right. So I would, again, add the things that maybe you're the most proud of, maybe the things that you're doing currently right now that you want to keep doing even when graduate school starts. Like, I would add the things that are the most impactful, the most meaningful. And again, going back to the storytelling. If you're telling a story in your personal statement and you're telling a story in your CV, tell a story in your CV that aligns with what you have mentioned in your personal statement. Right? You want to make sure that those two things align together to help communicate to the committee the coherent story of who you are and why you deserve to be in their program. All right? So that's the CV template. Let's move on to the next step. All right, y'all, let's talk about letters of recommendations. Now, I talk about this extensively on my YouTube channel, but I'll briefly mention it here. A lot of times people aren't exactly sure who to go to when it comes to them writing their letter of recommendation. Go for doctors, go for people who have a PhD, a PsyD in clinical psychology if you can. If they do not have a PhD or a doctorate in clinical psychology, go for any professional that has a doctorate. This could be a physicist or a chemist. This could be a social worker or a sociologist. I don't know, whoever has mentored you, supervised you, worked with you, who has a doctoral level degree, have them write your personal statement. The reason that they should have a doctorate is because you're going into a doctoral level program. And that doctoral level program is going to want to know if you can handle the adversity and the stressors of going through a doctoral level program and all of the things that come with it. So if you can find people who have a doctorate or a PhD or a PsyD, like I mentioned, definitely have them write you that letter of recommendation. And specifically ask them, usually you want to give them about 3 months in advance to write it, but specifically ask them if they can write you a strong letter. Chances are they've probably already written other letters to other students in the past, and most of these people have generic templates that they use for every student. I'm sorry, you probably are not special enough for them to use something different. But here's the thing. If you ask them to write a strong letter, or if you ask them if they can write you a strong letter, they are more likely to make it more unique for you and to put in a little bit of extra oomph and input and energy and investment into that letter to make it really special. All right, so they're probably still going to use a generic template, but they're going to make it more unique for you. And so that's why it's really important to ask the right people to write you a letter of recommendation. I know a lot of students who didn't pay attention to this, who didn't emphasize this at all. And let me tell you something. From a student, even though I'm a clinical psychology doctoral student, I've been involved in the application process as a student going into graduate school, but I've also been involved in the behind the scenes of taking part in the committee of accepting students. All right, so I know what these professors are paying attention to. I know what these faculty members care about. And they do, maybe not all of them, but they do look at your letter writers. And really what they're looking for is red flags, right? If they don't see any red flags, then they'll move on with your application. But if you can have a letter writer that writes you something really special, really unique, they're gonna pay attention to that, and that is definitely something that they're going to pay attention to. And so again, if you can make it clear that you want them to write you a strong letter, I'm sure they'll do that for you. All right, so that takes care of the personal statement, that takes care of the CV, that takes care of the letter writers. Make sure that every program is going to require you to pay an application fee. Make sure to take care of that. Typically, it's anywhere from $50 to $100. The next thing on that application list, again, is probably going to be the GPA. So hopefully you have the right GPA or a GPA that's over 3.0. A lot of schools right now are not requiring the GRE. A lot of questions have been asked to me specifically if students should take the GRE. Listen, if they say it's optional, right? So if you don't have to take it, why would you spend all that money and all that time doing something that isn't really going to matter? Now, of course, if they require it, you should definitely take it. If you've already taken it in the past, you can always use that old score. I think sometimes most schools will use the old scores from 5 years old. And here's the thing, if you feel really confident in the GRE and you've already been studying, and you feel like you can get a really high score, shoot, why not take it? I mean, it doesn't hurt, because you could also apply to other schools that require it, right? If you're only applying to schools that don't require it, you kind of limit yourself in terms of where you can get accepted to. But if you take it and you do really well on it, you can broaden your horizon in terms of some of the more competitive schools that you can apply to. And here's the thing, if you don't do well, you don't have to use it. So it's kind of a win-win situation in terms of whether or not you want to take the GRE or you don't want to take the GRE. All right, so up to you, totally up to you. I'm good either way with either decision that you make. After all of those things, I mean, typically that's going to be about it. Once we've taken care of the personal statement, the CV, the letter writers, as well as the application fee and any other different miscellaneous things like your GPA or GRE or your transcript scores that you have to turn in, they are going to look at your application and they're going to decide whether or not to give you an interview. Right? And they're typically going to email you that in advance. And here's the thing I would say is that you want to apply as early as you can. You don't want to wait till the last minute to put in your application. Apply early. I don't know this for certain, but there are going to be some schools, I have heard this before, there are going to be some schools that will go through applications on a first come, first served basis, right? And typically those are the people that get offered interviews first, right? So if you want to really assure yourself of getting the most out of the experience, I would apply early, I would apply on time, and on time really means early, right? So that is absolutely something that I would do if I was in your shoes. Finally, let's say you get to the interview process. All right, how do you prepare for the interview? Of course, you want to look dressed and ready to go. You want to be on time. If it's in person or virtual, you want to be 5 minutes early. You want to be very punctual. You want to be nice to everybody that you meet. You want to be smiling. Here's the thing. This is from someone who has gone through a lot of this interview process for internship and so forth. You get to the interview, there's a lot of people who are nervous and anxious, right? And hopefully you can learn how to handle that stress well. It is really nerve-wracking. And one of the best things to do in terms of feeling nervous is to think more about your external environment than your internal environment. Think about what color is that person wearing, or what color is the wall in their background, or what is the painting that is behind them. Think about your external environment, because if you think about your internal environment, you think about how anxious you are, how nervous you are, how irritable you are, you're going to be more anxious and nervous, right? So be more externally focused. And one of the ways to do that is to just be curious. Once you start to be curious about your external environment, about the other people who are in the room, you start to notice a lot of different things. You start to notice how nervous other people are. It's really fascinating. It's really fascinating. You need to try it. You start to notice how nervous other people are. You start to literally see the beads of sweat that is coming down people's faces. Some people's faces are bright red. Some people are shaking. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. Once you start to notice those things, you can get out of yourself a little bit more easily, and you can take a deep breath and just relax. I would practice mindfulness, every day up to the point of my interview. And I would also record myself going through mock interviews. And so if you have a family member, a spouse, or a partner that can ask you questions that you might get in the interview, I would record your answers to those questions. Listen to them, play it back, and make sure that you're answering those questions, that you're answering the question, and that you're answering it in a reasonable amount of time. You're going to feel tempted to ramble. You don't want to do that. They have a list of questions they need to get to. They don't need someone who's a rambler. Answer the question within, maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and make sure that you give yourself plenty of time for you to ask them questions as well. All right? Those are some really important key factors in terms of, listen, I've seen interviews go really, really well, and I've seen interviews not go so well, right? And at the end of the day, it really comes down to preparation. It comes down to if you've prepared to answer those questions, if you feel comfortable in the room. And here's the thing, if you're smiling, you would be surprised how many people are not smiling because they're so nervous. Smile. Listen, let people see your teeth. Let people, because here's the thing, and it's really, really difficult because they're going to ask you questions, and you're going to be so focused on the question that you're not going to have a good resting face. It happens all the time to so many people. And I'm here to tell you is to relax your face, use your smiling muscles to smile and show your teeth. It will make you stand out. I guarantee it. There was not going to be a lot of people, a lot of applicants who are smiling because they're going to be so nervous in the interview. Smile. Smile after you give a response. Smile before you give a response. Make sure that you are conscious of your resting face. If someone else is talking, nod your head, smile, do all of those different things. Again, it's remarkable whenever we get nervous, those things go out the window and we forget how to do those things and we look like a robot on screen, or we look like a robot in person. And you don't want to be that person. You want to be as humanistic as you can in terms of this whole situation, all right? So the last thing that we're going to go through is clinical psychology interview questions. I've created a file where you will find the most commonly asked questions that you should ask the interview. So you can probably guess what they're going to ask you. They're going to ask you, why you chose the school. What are your career goals and ambitions? That type of stuff. That type of stuff is easy. Here's what schools are starting to do way more often, is that for a 30-minute interview, they might spend 15 minutes of the time asking you questions, and then they're going to leave 15 minutes of the time where they expect you, again, I'm going to say this again, they expect you to ask them questions. It's a two-way streak. As much as you interview them, as much as they interview you, you are interviewing them. It's a two-way streak, right? So if they offer you an acceptance, you have a decision. You have a choice on whether or not you accept it or you reject it. All right. So it's really important for when they give those 15 minutes of time for you to ask questions, that you come ready with questions, right? Now, if you're doing a virtual interview, it's going to be really easy to just read off your screen in terms of the questions that you want to ask. If you're in person, you might have to write those questions down and ask them. And I have a series of questions that you can ask the faculty members, that you can ask whoever is a current student, that you can ask supervisors, that you can ask other students. I have it here. And again, here's the thing, y'all. Why is this so important? It's important because you want to communicate that you are interested in the program, that you want to be there, that you're excited to be there. And the best way to do that is by asking really good questions, okay? So I'm gonna leave this here. What we've gone through in terms of the documents is we've gone through the personal statement, the CV, as well as asking really good questions to the interviewers and to the program. All right, those are 3 things that I'm going to leave for free that you can have, that you can lock in. And one thing that I'll say about the clinical psychology interview is one of the things that's going to be really, really helpful is writing a thank you letter. Now, if you're in person, I brought thank you letters with me, like blank thank you letters, and I just went to the bathroom after having a really good conversation with a faculty member and just wrote thank you and gave it to them before I left. Now, you don't have to be that personal. There might be some people who might feel like, oh, that's a little icky or that's a little too, I get it. If you don't want to do it, that's okay. I did it, it worked out fine for me. If you would rather prefer to email them, that works just as well. Now, a lot of questions that I get asked is, well, what if I had 3 or 4 people that interviewed me? Choose the one. Typically, you want to choose like the clinical director or like the head person, because they're going to be the ones that are really going to have the most, the most when it comes to making a decision. So I would choose like the head person, and in the email say, hey, listen, thank you so much for granting me this interview. It went really well. I was really excited to be there. Had a really good time with so-and-so. So you might list out the people that you actually interviewed with. And you might also mention, hey, if you could thank those people for me, I would really appreciate that. So you could just send one email to one person where you thank everybody, right? If you've interviewed with multiple people. If you only interviewed with one person, you can just send an email to that one person, right? So a lot of different options that you can do, a lot of different things that you can do in terms of that type of situation. But hopefully, at this point, you should be good to go. You know what to do with the personal statement. You know what to do with the CV. You know what to do when it comes to the interview process. You are prepared. And here's the thing, if you've gotten to this step, if you've gotten to having an interview, chances are you're gonna get accepted. Most schools, I can tell you this right now, from just being behind the scenes in terms of the interview process for a lot of schools. Once you get an interview, here's the thing, they like you on paper, they wanna meet you in person, they wanna make sure that the person that they meet matches with the person on paper. And if that person does, you're good to go. Now here's the thing though. You're gonna have to really try hard to butcher it, right? So you may not have the best interview. It's okay. Like, give yourself that grace. Forgive yourself. Let it go. It's okay. You don't have to be amazing in your interview, and you don't have to say the most perfect things. You can butcher it a little bit. That's okay. As long as you don't say anything crazy or anything out of whack or anything out of character, you're gonna be just fine, all right? If you have a mediocre interview, you're gonna be okay. Because again, it's not gonna matter that much. When it comes to answering the questions, make sure you pay attention to the question. Make sure that if you haven't heard the question, you ask them to repeat the question. Some programs might do this. They might dock you on certain aspects of the question. So for example, they might ask you a 3-point question. What does that mean? They might ask you, hey, tell me about yourself. What is your clinical experience and why are you here? Why do you want to go into this program? If you only answer 2 out of those 3 questions, they dock you on points. And those 2 things that you answered might be phenomenal answers. They might be amazing answers. It's not going to matter because you didn't answer that 3rd part. So you want to make sure you answer every single part of the question. And one thing that I do that is really helpful for me is I write out the question. I write it down on a piece of paper or I type it. Why? Because that way I can see if I've actually answered each part of the question. And you can even ask them, hey, do you mind if I write this question out? Trust me, they will be more than happy to hear you ask that question and to see you writing down the question because they know that you are serious about answering the question and you're probably going to get all of the points on that question. Okay, so those are some general guidelines. This is our workshop, y'all. I hope it was helpful. Here's the thing. Some of you all are getting ready for interviews. Some of you all are getting ready for the application process. Honestly, if you've taken the time to go through this webinar series, you are more prepared than most people, and you will do just fine on the interview. I totally, wholeheartedly believe it. And if you feel like you need those additional resources, they're always there for you. If you need individual coaching, you can put in an application. I am taking requests in terms of one-on-one coaching sessions. And so if you are looking to be individually coached by me in terms of any part of the application process, whether that's the personal statement, whether that's the CV, whether that's even going through mock interviews and getting ready for mock interviews, I am your person. I can help you go through that process. I've helped hundreds of students get through that process, right? So I can help you with that as well. You can put in an application. I can review that application. And I can get back to you in terms of if you meet the criteria of being a good fit in terms of that specific one-on-one coaching. And so with that, I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you again. Thank you so much.